I will talk about the importance of undergraduate education, both from a general perspective as well as in the context of statistics and the Department of Statistics here at Texas A&M. It shouldn't be a surprise that having an undergraduate degree brings with it substantial benefits, both long-term and short-term, for the student. This is in terms of earnings, certainly, and lifetime wealth. Recent estimates are that, on average, in the U.S., a young professional with a bachelor's degree can expect to earn nearly 2/3 more than a comparable person without a bachelor's degree. That's in terms of starting or early career salaries. So when you factor in cost of living and merit increases over the course of a career, there are clearly going to be substantial benefits financially to getting the undergraduate degree as opposed to not getting it. Having an undergraduate degree will also generally bring with it greater professional opportunity, more variety in the types of jobs that are out there, more flexibility and individuality for the graduate, and that will generally translate to positive impact on their overall quality of life. So it's definitely very important to our students' futures that they do complete an undergraduate education, at least. Common elements of an undergraduate education include developing skills in asking questions and solving problems, being a continual learner, working in a team environment, providing leadership to a team, effective communication, and an appreciation and ability to support diversity, where that would include diversity of beliefs, backgrounds, socioeconomic factors, all things that students will surely be exposed to during their careers. So as an undergraduate institution, we and others play a critical role for society, providing the next generation of professionals who can then lead the further and future development of our society. As a little background on where we stand in the U.S. relative to other countries around the world, this figure comes from the Pew Research Center and illustrates average scores among 15-year-olds on a particular standardized test that has separate categories for each of science, math, and reading. And we can see that the U.S. is near to the middle of the pack with respect to other countries. This figure also comes from the Pew Research Center, and it illustrates that while there had been improvements in percentile performance in the math category, improvements over a period of about 15 years from 1990 to 2005, there appears to be a slight dip in percentile math performance in the most recent 10 years. So as a country, our students are not as strong relatively as we might hope and expect, and there is some evidence that we're actually going in the wrong direction, at least in the context of math. So Texas A&M specifically puts us as instructors and faculty in touch with lots and lots of talented students. A&M is ranked currently number 69 among national universities. That's 25th if we limit attention to public schools. It's also been ranked number 43 in terms of best value nationwide, and we have the 14th best engineering program based on 2018 U.S. News rankings. Our total enrollment is about 65,000, which is among the very highest enrollments in any U.S. university. And of course, we have at A&M rich traditions and a strong and large Aggie network, so that students who come through A&M are touched and connected by A&M and the connections that come with that experience for the rest of their lives. So we interact with lots of talented students over a long period of time. A&M also, of course, has the land grant heritage. Our Vision 2020 institutional statement cites this heritage and argues that Texas students should have access in Texas to very good, top quality education, that part of our service to the state should include making impactful contributions to the most difficult societal problems here in Texas and beyond, things like public education and crime and the environment. And A&M, as part of its service to the state, again, should enhance economic development in all regions of the state. Then, in the context of statistics and undergraduate education, we all know that statistics and data science is in very high demand currently, and it's projected to continue to be in future decades. In our undergraduate service courses, elementary statistics classes for non-statistics majors, we touch thousands of students each year. And we now have our own undergraduate statistics program with nearly 150 majors. So there are many students who we have a direct contact with as their instructors in elementary statistics. Elementary statistics classes have some unique characteristics. So I've quoted David Moore from a paper of his in 2005 about preparing our graduate students to be good, effective teachers and communicators of statistics. So he said that elementary courses in statistics are certainly harder to teach well and arguably more important to our field than more advanced classes. Some of that has to do with the fact that in an elementary statistics class, we're working with students who have little to no background in statistics. So kind of starting from scratch with brand new ideas and jargon. And his point about the relative importance of an elementary class stems from the idea that for many people, especially non-statistics majors, the elementary class or classes that they have as an undergraduate in statistics may be their only exposure to statistics. When you couple that with the fact that many elementary classes are taught by graduate students who themselves have received little to no training in how to be effective teachers or communicators of statistics, it shouldn't be surprising that so many people have a bad memory or bad taste in their mouth about statistics based on their 1 or 2 intro or elementary statistics classes they took in college. So it's difficult to teach these well, and because of the long-term, potentially negative impact they can have, they are very important to be taught well. So among all the many non-statistics majors who have gone through our elementary classes, we might wonder how many of them would have taken more statistics or more math or more computational and mathematical training if their elementary exposure to the topic had been of higher quality and captured their interest more effectively. David Moore said specifically that future attitudes towards statistics are greatly influenced by their experience in elementary courses. So, relatively speaking, there's a lot at stake in our elementary courses. And as I mentioned a moment ago, these elementary courses are effectively recruiting grounds for future statisticians. So if we can avoid putting a bad taste in the mouth of these students and turning them off to statistics, but instead capturing their interest and attention and inspiring them to be curious about statistics and how it can be used, we could end up with a cohort of new statistics professionals. For our reference with regard to how to teach statistics effectively at the elementary undergraduate level, I've listed here the revised GAZE guidelines from the ASA. So these are guidelines for assessment and instruction in statistics education. There was a GAZE report that originally came out in 2006, again from the ASA, but then a new committee was formed and a revised GAZE report was released in just 2016. There's 6 main ideas of what the authors claim define effective teaching of statistics. So, teaching statistical thinking, that is, statistics as an investigative process of problem solving and decision making, as opposed to, say, presenting statistics as an exercise in solving probability homework problems or using a particular software program to do something specific. So our goal should be to teach statistics as a way of thinking and a way of approaching problems, rather than as a cookbook full of recipes for what to do in specific situations. Still on the topic of teaching statistical thinking, the GAZE report cites the importance of students getting experience with multivariable thinking. Instructors should focus on conceptual understanding. With a conceptual understanding that is strong, students arguably are prepared sufficiently to pick up a textbook and fill in details that have slipped their mind. But if they understand the concept, that will arguably carry them far. Instructors should integrate real data sets that have a context and purpose. So this is meant to distinguish between using made-up, maybe toy data sets that don't come from the real world and don't resemble real-world data. So our students are best off if they can be presented with actual real-world data and required to draw from their coursework to design and carry out an effective analysis. Modern pedagogical research argues that our instructors should foster active learning, where active learning refers to engaging the students in the classroom, for example, to be active participants in the learning process, rather than an instructor standing at the front of the room and lecturing for an hour with the students passively sitting and trying to absorb the information. Educational research has made it clear that the students are better off in terms of learning and retaining and building practical skill. They're better off the more actively engaged in the classroom experience they are. Things like discussion or working in groups to solve a problem or working homework problems as a class together. These are all examples of active learning, and whereas they can be challenging and time-consuming to design and implement, especially the first time they're used, education research argues that it's worth it, and especially in elementary intro classes, it's perhaps imperative that our instructors present the material in an active learning way. Our instructors should use technology. Certainly this includes statistical software for doing analyses and making pictures and so on. And I guess kind of an obvious one I would say is our instructors should use assessments to improve and evaluate student learning. I think the point here is not that you should have assessments versus not having assessments, but rather the goal of using assessments should be both to evaluate the students' learning, assign them a grade, how well they did, how much work they did in this class, but also as an instructional tool in and of themselves. So assessments ideally are designed so that students learn something when they interact with them. In closing, I would like to mention as an aside the important issue of how do we as a department train our graduate students to be effective teachers and communicators of statistics. Many of our PhD students, for example, will go to jobs in academia and have teaching responsibilities. Many of our elementary undergraduate classes are taught by graduate teaching assistants. And there's all sorts of difficulties and challenges that come with doing that. For example, GATs, graduate assistants for teaching, are often more mature than students in an elementary undergrad class here at A&M. They're generally highly driven and motivated, and generally much more comfortable with mathematics than the average student in an elementary statistics class here at A&M. Because of the substantial differences between the typical GAT and the typical student in an elementary undergrad stat class, the GAT may not be aware of substantial obstacles to their being effective teachers. For example, if I'm a PhD student and I've been studying math for a decade, I'm very comfortable with mathematical notation and algorithms and associated things. It would be very easy for me to talk over the head, so to speak, of my class. I put the formula on the board. It's clear as day to me because it's rigorously defined what I'm trying to say, whereas my students may have effectively shut down as soon as they saw my mathematical notation. So no matter how clearly I write it mathematically, it's possible that my students just don't get it. There would be alternative ways to approach that learning task. For example, less math notation and more plain English explanation. or if math notation is absolutely required, slow the class down perhaps, spend as much time as possible as needed on this specific idea, this concept, so that it can be explained from different angles, demonstrated and visualized with pictures and examples, and so on. A related issue can be due to language. If I, as a teaching assistant, am not a native English speaker, it can be especially challenging for me to communicate effectively with my students. The Gaze report mentioned, as we saw a moment ago, the importance of active learning, but here again, our teaching assistants may well have experienced a more traditional passive learning environment during their undergraduate training. So they may not have experience or practice or even be aware that there are different ways to teach a class. So I think we should view teaching and communication generally as a craft, in that it requires skill and practice, not just book knowledge or an ability to work homework problems. And being an effective teacher requires more than just the individual possessing charisma or an outgoing, extroverted, confident personality. And I'll close this talk with a question. Are we doing enough, and what might we do additionally to train our graduate students to be effective teachers and communicators of statistics? There are classes at a few of our competitors' departments that are specifically designed for PhD statistics students to learn about and get practice with teaching. There's examples of this at Columbia, Iowa State, Penn State, Virginia Tech, and Minnesota. There may be more that I'm not aware of. So something for us to consider is, do we want to do something similar? Thank you.